The Scott Jennings Show is proudly sponsored by Lear Capital. Since 1997, Lear has helped Americans protect their retirement accounts and savings with physical gold and silver. With thousands of five-star reviews and $3 billion in transactions, Lear is who I trust to help me buy gold and silver. Visit LearScott.com.
The voice of free speech. The truth delivered. Common sense for the American people. Welcome to the Scott Jennings Show.
Breaking news. The United States Senate voted in the middle of the night to fund most, but not all, of the Department of Homeland Security. But what will happen in the House? We've got the latest on this fast-developing story, including a huge interview to react to this today. A Democratic congresswoman has been found guilty by the House Ethics Committee of corruption. We'll tell you about that. And poor old Jimmy Kimmel just cannot get his foot out of his mouth when it comes to describing his feelings about working-class Americans. It is Friday, March 27th. This is Common Sense for the American people. I'm Scott Jennings, broadcasting for Salem today, and we are live in a somewhat cloudy and rainy Louisville, Kentucky. Topping the news this hour, fast-moving developments on Capitol Hill following a dead-of-night vote in the Senate to reopen or at least fund most of the Department of Homeland Security. Senators did pass a funding bill on a voice vote that funded all of DHS except for ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. And then they adjourned and they left town, a 2-week recess for Easter. This puts the ball back in the House's court. And over there, well, Republicans are not happy about the way this has been put back in their laps. The Speaker of the House is blaming Democrats this morning for the entire mess. Here is Mike Johnson a little while ago in the hallway in the Capitol in cut number 13.
I get all members together and decide that strategy this morning, but I'd say it's infuriating that Democrats are willing to inflict pain on the American people simply so they can defund the agency that is responsible, literally, for removing criminal illegal aliens.
And as the Speaker of the House said, they are getting the House Republicans together. They're having a conference call and talking to the press this hour. And we here at the Scott Jennings Show are expecting Speaker Mike Johnson to call into the show live today during our 2-hour rotation and react to what's happening in the Senate and to tell us how his conference has decided to react over in the House. My sources say that the current thinking among House Republicans is to pass a clean 60-day continuing resolution that fully funds the Department of Homeland Security, including ICE and including Border Patrol. House Republicans are telling me they will never vote to defund border security. As we reported, many House Republicans are unhappy, and this deal that came out of the Senate, again, in the middle of the night, is on extremely shaky ground over in the House. But again, stay tuned. We'll have the Speaker on later in the show, and we'll get the latest, the absolute latest on this breaking news. Other Capitol Hill news, and this is also breaking this morning in Washington. The House Ethics Committee has found Representative Sheila Sherfilis McCormick of Florida guilty on 25 ethics charges after a nearly 7-hour televised hearing. Now, we brought you this story earlier this week, and it was likely the only place that you heard about it because Democrats in mainstream media have ignored and covered up this blatant corruption. This investigation spanned 3 years, and it found that McCormick steered $5 million in federal taxpayer relief funds into her own congressional campaign. Sherfilis McCormick faces criminal charges over all of this in federal court. She's due to go on trial for that next month. The ethics panel, it was led by House Ethics Chairman Michael Guest, and they deliberated last night, well into the night, past midnight, following that long trial. In fact, it was the Ethics Committee's first public trial in nearly 16 years. Quite a rare sight on Capitol Hill. The Ethics Committee found, quote, clear and convincing evidence that Sherfilis McCormick was guilty on all but 2 of the initial 27 counts that had been brought against her. Without a doubt, ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the most brazen acts of corruption in modern congressional history. And what stands out here, not just the findings, but rather the silence. Democrats have largely looked the other way on the corruption of one of their own, and mainstream media has been conspicuously quiet. You can do the math on why that might be. What happens next? Well, likely Sherfilis McCormick will face an expulsion vote on the floor of the U.S. House unless she chooses to resign before that moment. This is not the only ethics story brewing in Washington today. Everyone's favorite gassy congressman, Eric Swalwell of California, may be in some hot water as well. Fellow Democrats of Swalwell's are raising ethics questions about his outreach for a business, his political AI startup called FindRaiser. Some say what he is doing is running afoul of House ethics rules. 6 Democratic political operatives have told the news site Notice that Swalwell and his former chief of staff, Yardena Wolf, repeatedly pitched this business, FindRaiser, to lawmakers and their staff via texts, emails, and in-person meetings. Now, House ethics rules prohibit lawmakers and their staff from using their official position to gain pecuniary advantage or to promote private interests. Ethics guidance, in fact, warns against actions that could create the perception of improper conduct. Now, Swalwell is currently running for governor of California. Seems like this might come up in the attacks from other campaigns. If it's all true, by the way, it raises fresh questions about the intersection of technology, fundraising, and official duties as Swalwell navigates that crowded gubernatorial primary field. More corruption news, this one in Louisiana. The state Supreme Court there has suspended the license of Black Lives Matter lawyer Tanzania Ruffin after she was indicted for stealing $250,000. Fox 8 News in New Orleans called it this way in cut number 11.
Also this hour, here's what else we are monitoring. The Louisiana Supreme Court suspends the law license of a lawyer, Tanzania Ruffin. This after she was federally indicted this month. She is accused of stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from a client she represented for a battery case in Orleans Parish last year. Federal prosecutors charged her with a count of wire fraud. Ruffin's lawyer contends she paid the more than $250,000 she's accused of stealing, and she paid that back. She will enter a plea in the case next week. The Supreme Court says Ruffin is barred from practicing law until further notice.
Out there of people involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. You won't believe this one. Or maybe you will, since it takes place in San Francisco. The man convicted in the killing of 84-year-old Grandpa Vicha, a brutal, unprovoked attack that was caught on video, is now being released from jail. The perpetrator here is Antoine Watson. Now, he was sentenced to 8 years. He served 5, and now a judge has decided it is time to turn him loose. Here's the justification. The judge says this is in the best interest of public safety to let this killer out of jail. Delivering the ruling, Judge Linda Colfax noted that the criminal here suffers from PTSD and had experienced abuse, neglect, and violence as a child. Now, Watson's own excuse for killing Grandpa Vicha, seriously, was that he was stressed that day from having encountered the police earlier in the day. So that caused him, he said, to then kill this 84-year-old man. Now, the victim's family says this is not justice. And they are right, folks. They are livid. This is exactly the kind of thinking that's turned parts of California into a revolving door for violent criminals. Soft on crime ideology dressed up in nice language with devastating real-world consequences. That's what you get in blue states and blue cities these days. Once again, we don't have to live this way. This case, by the way, was the spur for the Stop Asian Hate movement that launched a few years ago. Again, the judge here, Linda Colfax, Colfax, who appears to be ignoring the cold, hard facts of this case of violent crime. It's common sense for the American people. I'm Scott Jennings, broadcasting for Salem. A quick word for our friends at Relief Factor. Now, if you've been listening to this show, you know that I personally endorse Relief Factor. We're using it in the Jennings household. And there's one more good thing that's happened recently, and that is Relief Factor has improved the formula. They have added a black pepper extract. It helps your body absorb the key ingredients of Relief Factor even better than before. So if you've been using Relief Factor, you know that it works well. Now it's going to work even better. If you haven't been using Relief Factor, perhaps this is the information you need to make the call today. If you have aches and pains, what do you have to lose? They've got a thing called the 3-week quick start, $19.95. You go to relieffactor.com or you call 1-800-4RELIEF. Say, I want the 3-week quick start that Scott Jennings was telling me about on Salem Radio. $19.95, folks. Relieffactor.com, 1-800-4RELIEF. Get rid of those aches and pains with Relief Factor. We'll take a check back on the corruption and fraud going on in Minnesota when we come back. It's Scott Jennings on Salem. Stay with us.
Hey, it's Scott Jennings. You know, I got to tell you, I think nutrition has gotten way too complicated. Every week there's a new powder, a new lab-created formula, some new breakthrough. But here is the truth. We've been told since we were kids to eat our fruits and vegetables. Nobody really had to explain why. We just did it. Because when you eat whole foods, you're getting phytonutrients, those natural compounds that your body uses to adjust, repair, and respond every single day. That's not hype. That's how human beings were designed. That's why I take Balance of Nature. They use a tailored vacuum cold process that stabilizes the phytonutrition in fruits and veggies, so you're getting real whole food nutrition, not synthetic substitutes. Their whole health system includes fruits and veggies plus fiber and spice, 47 ingredients in one simple routine. I take it myself. If you want to fight the good fight, go to balanceofnature.com to subscribe and save today. Join hundreds of thousands of customers in one simple routine that is changing the world.
Ready for some common sense and a little Kentucky windage? Here's Scott Jennings.
It is Friday, March 27th, and we are following up today on all the fraud that's been discovered in the People's Republic of Minnesota. State Representative Kristen Robbins joins us now. She's leading the ongoing fraud hearings up there. Representative Robbins, thanks for joining us here on the show. I believe you had another hearing this week. What's the latest? What have you uncovered in Minnesota?
Thanks for having me. Yes, this week our hearing was on the amount of cash that's being flown out of the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. It's a stunning number. This year, or in 2025, there were $350 million in cash flown out of our airport, which is 99% higher than the amount of cash flying out of JFK, LAX, or much bigger airports. So it was a stunning number, and we had witnesses talking about why this is legal, how the process is for this, and also how it ties back to childcare fraud, a decade ago. So this is something we in Minnesota have to get a handle on.
Okay, so you're telling me that $350 million went out of the country through the airport in St. Paul, Minneapolis. I guess the next logical question is, where did it go?
Well, it's very challenging to trace. Most of it, they seem to think, goes to Dubai or the UAE, and then from there goes out to East Africa. But because it's cash, once it gets over in the first destination, it's much harder to track. And that's one of the concerns. So early on, when this first was, there were whistleblowers back in the 2015, 2018 period, and they had established credible ties to terrorism with the money. There were actually some court convictions here of 2 women who were sending cash through the Hawala system, and they were convicted on terrorism charges. So then banks stopped working with the Hawalas, and that's when everything switched to cash, and it's actually become harder to trace. But Secretary Besson is doing a good job. He was here in January. They've really tried to help us with some geo-tracking and some investigations and limiting the reporting. So now you can still take an unlimited amount out in cash, which I think most Americans are shocked by. But it used to be if you took 10,000 or more, you had to fill out a form. Now they've reduced it to 3,000 or more. So at least we're aware when large sums of cash are going out. But I'm hoping that our federal partners will put a limit on what you can take out of the country in cash.
There has been some reporting that some of this cash going out of Minnesota and then overseas and winding up in East Africa actually winds up in the hands of terrorist organizations. Is it your belief that that is true, that our money that is supposed to be helping people in Minnesota winds up in the hands of terrorists and other places?
Yes. So as I mentioned, there have been two actually court convictions demonstrating that link. But then also, whenever the Hawalas get the cash on the other side, because a lot of the territory is controlled by al-Shabaab, they take a cut. So indirectly, al-Shabaab gets a cut of what flies out of here in cash from Minnesota.
Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my head around how all this gets converted to cash. So I assume it's electronic transfers from the federal government to the state government, and then state government's paying these fraudulent outfits, and then at what point is it converted to cash? And then, kind of a rudimentary question, if you go to the airport with hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of cash, how are people carrying it? Is it in sacks? Is it in suitcases? Is it taped to their bodies? Have you all discovered how the transportation of it actually works?
So we had great testimony from a retired TSA officer from the airport. And what she testified is that they bring this, it's like a carry-on suitcase. They bring it through the checkpoint and it's flagged as a suitcase of cash. And then they take those people into a private room and they look through the suitcase. And she said, we're not counting the money. We're just looking to make sure there are no guns or drugs buried under the money in the suitcase. So what concerns me is that A, they're not counting the money, and B, they're not tying it to the form that supposedly is filled out to track this. So there's a form from FinCEN, it's called Form 105, that people have to file with the airport 72 hours in advance of when they plan to leave with cash. And if they're not verifying that form is tied to this courier and this amount of cash, I don't know what good the forms do. So that part needs to be tightened up. And as I said, I think we should limit the amount of cash. People can certainly, it's their money. Well, in this case, it might be fraudulent money, but in some cases, people want to take their own money. That's fine, but you shouldn't be able to take it in cash. You should have to wire it or let there be a process for following it.
Yeah, sounds very shady, to say the least. State Representative Kristen Robbins of Minnesota, thanks for joining us. We'll check back with you over the weeks and months ahead. I think you all are just scratching the surface there about all the fraud that's going on in Minneapolis. We're going to take a break. When we come back from Politico, Jonathan Martin, one of the best-known political journalists in the country, is going to join us. We'll talk about the breaking news of the possible but shaky deal to fund DHS in Washington. Scott Jennings here on Salem. Stay with us. Hey, it's Scott Jennings. Depending on where you live, crime may be skyrocketing, and you may already own a firearm. But before you face the financial, legal, and emotional weight of pulling the trigger, there's a smarter option. It's called Byrna. That's B-Y-R-N-A. Byrna makes a less lethal launcher that fires tear gas and kinetic rounds designed to stop an attacker for up to 40 minutes. That gives you time to escape and call for help without deadly consequences. Their best-selling compact launcher is sleek, slim, and incredibly powerful. It's about the size of a smartphone, and it is ideal for concealed carry. It's comfortable, discreet, and confidence-building. It fires at 400 feet per second with serious stopping power, enough to shut down a threat fast without the legal and moral complexity of lethal force. Byrna is proudly American. Over 80% of the components are U.S. sourced. Every Byrna launcher is hand-assembled in Fort Wayne, Indiana. With over 750,000 of these things sold worldwide, Byrna is best in class. It's legal in all 50 states. No background checks. Comes right to your door.
Learn more at Byrna.com, BYRNA.com.
Saving Western civilization, one busted leftist narrative at a time. It's the Scott Jennings Show.
And you're listening to it on Friday, March 27th. Common sense for the American people. Scott Jennings broadcasting today from Louisville, Kentucky. In just 60 seconds, famed political journalist and author Jonathan Martin of Politico will join us to tackle today's breaking news, including what's going on up at the Capitol regarding getting DHS funded. First, I do have a message that every parent and, frankly, every grandparent needs to hear. More kids are being targeted online. They're spending time on these gaming platforms, social media, messaging apps, and there's not a lot of protections for the kids on there. Predators are slipping through the cracks, and it's families that pay the price. Our friends and partners at Child Help hear from children every day who are being contacted by predators through these games and these apps. These kids are being groomed, manipulated, and threatened by adults who are pretending to be someone else. Child Help, runs the National Child Abuse Hotline. They hear from kids every day. Here's a story. A boy called them up terrified and ashamed. He met someone in an online game. Turns out that person was an adult who started demanding photos from the boy. And he told the boy, "I'm going to lie to your parents about you if you don't comply." As you can imagine, this little boy was absolutely frightened for his life. He called Child Help. Child Help interceded and saved the boy's life, most likely. That's why Child Help matters. It's why your donation of $27 matters, because for $27, you can save one child from this predatory abuse. Here's how you do it. Go to childhelp.org/Scott or text the word Child Help to 94878 and chip in $27 today. Here's something I want you to know personally. I know Child Help. I know the people who run the organization. I've been to their headquarters. I trust them. They're using the money to save children. Period. Full stop. Please support Child Help in our efforts to end the scourge of child abuse today. All right, joining me on the line for a conversation about what's going on in Washington and national politics, Jonathan Martin of Politico. You probably read his stuff over the years. Written for Politico, the New York Times, best-selling author out there. J. Mart, we just saw each other in Florida this week. We briefed the real estate people. Good to talk to you.
Hey, Scott. Good to see you, man.
Thank you for doing this. We've got a lot of breaking news right now, and I'm going to start there. The Senate overnight did a voice vote and funded most of DHS. It goes back to the House. Based on what I'm hearing, Speaker Johnson and the House Republicans are none too pleased with what's happened, and they're not going to ratify this deal. We've got the Speaker coming on, I think, in about a half an hour. What are your sources telling you, Jonathan?
There's an old saying in the Capitol, the other party is the opposition, but the other chamber is the enemy. And I think this is right. One of those cases. This is one of those cases where it's not just partisan. It's always partisan, but it's not just partisan. It's also about turf, and it's about the House not wanting to be jammed by the Senate, because the House is always jammed by the Senate. So most of your listeners know this, but late last night, basically what happened was the Senate stopped trying to cut a deal. The two parties gave up, and they decided to just do what they usually do, which is punt, buy some more time, and go off on recess. And so they effectively, in the Senate, the voice vote wasn't even recorded, Scott. They passed a bill that funds everything in DHS, including those TSA agents, but not ICE and the border folks, and decided to address that down the road and then just fix the TSA problem now. Okay. The problem is the House guys said, whoa, wait a minute. We're not cool with that. We actually want to have a say in this and want to address a policy issue now. So at this point, there's a total question, and maybe Mike Johnson will clarify this for you, as to whether or not they're going to fund DHS and get those TSA agents funded going into the Easter recess. I think it's up in the air now.
Yeah, it seems that way. And I know that right now our sources are telling us they're having a conference call among House Republicans right now trying to sort out what they're going to do next. It is interesting. The shutdown lasted over 40 days. I'm trying to discern what Democrats think they got out of this. The TSA agents, I guess today, are missing their third paycheck. They wanted some policy changes at ICE and in the way we do immigration enforcement, but the voice vote the Senate held last night didn't make any policy changes. It was just simply a funding bill. Did Democrats actually get anything out of this other than inflicting misery on America's travelers?
No. In fact, they could have had some policy changes that were made to ICE, and I think there were some offers on the table. They just could never get to an agreement, and so ultimately there were no policy changes made to ICE, and they effectively just kicked the can down the road to have that conversation later. And the Republicans are going to try to pass the ICE funding through what's called reconciliation, in which you just need a bare majority of senators, which could make it easier depending upon what else is in the bill. But no, Scott, I mean, the upshot of all of this, bickering and negotiation the last few months is neither party got anything necessarily that they want. The Republicans wanted just to pass DHS entirely. Democrats wanted to pass DHS after making tweaks to ICE, and neither of those things have happened. They've just bought more time.
Yeah, so it seems like in the House what they might be plotting to do, and again, I think this is very fluid, J. Mart, because they're still meeting, would be for the House Republicans to come back and pass a clean funding bill for DHS, a 60-day clean CR that includes ICE and CBP. That would then go back to the Senate. But the Senate adjourned last night for 2 weeks. And so, if the House follows through on that plan, what happens next? Do they stay on the recess, or do they cancel the recess and come back? What's your best guess?
If the House passes something that can't get through the Senate easily, I don't think Leader Thune would call them back. Now, if the House passes something that Thune thinks that they have the votes to pass, then he may call them back. I just don't think he's going to call them back for more political theatrics. I think it depends what comes out of the House.
So bottom line here, and we'll learn more here in the next couple of hours, we may be in for 2 or more weeks of this continued TSA nightmare. Now, on top of all this, last night or last afternoon, I suppose, President Trump announced that he was declaring a national emergency and authorizing the new DHS Secretary, Mark Wayne Mullen, to pay TSA agents, which I guess they are going to try to do, although it's not clear to me whether someone will challenge the authority on that. What are you hearing on that front?
Well, that's exactly right. So, President Trump, who doesn't have a lot of patience for Congress generally, but certainly not when TSA is not being funded and the airports are causing terrible daily headlines. He has no patience. Has done what he's done on a lot of things, which is try to do something via executive order, Scott. And he's trying to basically pay these folks now with a stroke of a pen. As you know, the challenge with governing by executive order is this stuff gets challenged in courts and it gets bounced around the appellate courts, and that takes time. And so, I think you're right. This would be challenged on constitutional grounds, and it would go through the courts. And then we're 10 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks at TSA. Folks still aren't getting paid, and there's more lines because more of them aren't showing up or they're quitting entirely, and we still have the same mess on our hands.
I guess what's not clear to me is I think today they were supposed to get a paycheck, but it's not clear to me whether that's been transmitted or will be transmitted. I'm not actually sure, just as a technical matter, where that stands today. Have you heard?
I haven't, and there is some chatter about trying to include like a retroactive bonus for 10K or something like that as an incentive to keep these folks working while they're not getting paid. So they may have to do something like that. I just don't know how you keep expecting TSA agents months in to show up for work when they're not getting paid because they got to pay bills. The Congress has got to do something about this, because doing an executive order, as you point out, Scott, is going to go to the courts.
That's Jonathan Martin from Politico. J-Mart, we call him around Washington, D.C. You probably read his stuff over the years. One of the best sourced reporters in America. J-Mart, let's shift focus and talk a little politics.
Sure.
You and I had a chance to brief a group down in Florida this week. Give us your assessment right now on the Senate and the House as we get ever closer to the 2026 midterms.
Look, every president, with very few exceptions, has a difficult time in the first midterm of their presidency. And in President Trump's case, this is sort of his second term, but obviously it's a new term here. And so I think it's going to be a challenge. His numbers among Republicans are sky high. He's got a grip on his party unlike any other modern president. But it's a very different question than where he's with the general electorate. And that gap, I think, is going to create a challenge in the general election. And Scott, as you know, the other challenge for Republicans is in the Trump era is getting their voters who love President Trump to show up when he's not on top of the ticket. So you combine the headwinds every president faces in the first midterm with the unique challenge of President Trump not being able to get his voters out when he's not running. And I think it's going to be a tough cycle for Republicans, probably lose the House, and I think the Senate's now in jeopardy as well.
Yeah, there's some interesting states out there on the Senate map. Democrats, I still think it's uphill for Democrats in the Senate, but a few states are probably a little dicier than Republicans wanted them to be, chiefly Ohio, Iowa, and Alaska. And we can talk more about the map as the year wears on. I got about a minute left here, Jay Martin. I want to go back to our original topic. There's a little bit of news here coming out of Chuck Schumer. So here's the latest. As I mentioned, the House Republicans are floating the idea of passing a 60-day continuing resolution to fully fund DHS, including immigration enforcement. Now, Chuck Schumer is saying a 60-day CR that locks in the status quo is, quote, dead on arrival in the Senate, and Republicans know it. So if the House Republicans do this, which it sounds like they want to do and could probably do, doesn't sound like the Senate would come back to town quickly and pass it, which means we may be in for a couple of more weeks of nothing here, or the void, I suppose, and where that leaves these TSA agents and other Homeland Security workers, I don't quite know. J-Mar, we got 30 seconds. Give you the last word.
Well, you may have to do Plan C. They tried Congress. They tried a Trump executive order. They may have to go to Plan C, Scott, which is, Uncle Elon cuts a big check, man, and sort of helps all these TSA workers in the lurch at least get through the next couple of months. Otherwise, I'm not sure how you're going to have TSA workers showing up if they're not getting paid here.
Yeah, these TSA workers, they make on average $50,000 a year. They have been absolutely used as political pawns, my opinion, by Democrats, and they're the ones suffering, and it's really pretty crappy what's happening to them. Jonathan Martin from Politico, thanks for coming by. We've got to take a break. When we come back, I guess there's more No Kings rallies. We'll get some news on that after this. It's the Scott Jennings Show on Salem. Stay with us.
Common sense for the American people. This is the Scott Jennings Show. He's the author of the best-selling book, A Revolution of Common Sense. Here's Scott Jennings.
It's Friday, March 27th. We're tracking the breaking news out of Washington. The tussle over DHS funding going on between Republicans and Democrats, and now between the Senate and the House, unfolding as we speak. We'll keep an eye on the news as it breaks today. And what are Democrats doing right now? Well, they're planning to have more No Kings rallies, I think, this weekend. Now, they claim these No Kings rallies are supposed to be peaceful protests against the incumbent Trump administration. They say, we have no desires for violence. That's what they want you to believe. However, recent Zoom calls uncovered by Kyle Olson from townhall.com may prove the contrary, and to discuss those calls, Mr. Olson is here. Kyle Olson from Town Hall, welcome to the Scott Jennings Show. Tell us, you uncovered these Zoom calls. What are they actually saying to each other, these Democratic organizers behind the scenes, sir?
Yes, well, thanks for having me. So they had a No Kings Best Practices share out on March 6th, and that intent was to have this national call where they were going to talk about best practices about how to do rallies. They call them rallies, but they're protests. And it was all leading up to the protests, No Kings 3, that's happening tomorrow. And one of the things that I found interesting was one of the organizers said, nonviolence is our strategy, but when you're building coalitions, it's important to not have violence. and they said even civil disobedience, they're not wanting to do that. We're not doing that. Indivisible is not doing that right now. Okay, maybe later. I don't know. Depends on how bad it gets. And
so let me make sure I understand. They're leaving open the possibility of some kind of something other than just chanting and yelling, right?
Correct. Depends on how bad it gets. So if they don't like what President Trump is doing, they apparently are open to violence, and which I think is a very disturbing thing, because this Indivisible is organizing, it's a group called Indivisible, is organizing these No Kings protests, and they are really sort of the tip of the spear of the left when it comes to fighting President Trump and his agenda.
So I have to ask, how did you get access to these Zoom calls, these people who are organizing the No Kings rallies? What, without revealing, of course, the journalistic methods and sources, how did you get clued into this? Because this is some pretty interesting breaking news, the plotting of violence on the American left here.
Well, it's good sourcing, but also it's just a matter of identifying who the players are, what the organizations are, and what their real intent is. Because of course, it's not just about, they just want to fight President Trump. They want to win elections. And so what these organizers will do is they will get people to come out to the protests. They'll get their names, phone numbers, all that information, and then they follow up with them and they turn them into political activists to ultimately win the midterms later this year.
Something that is interesting to me about all of these people that seem to have unlimited amounts of time to protest and so on and so forth, it strikes me that there has to be money flowing into this somewhere, somehow. I mean, how else do you explain all these people with unlimited amounts of time on their hands and access to materials and so on? Do you have any idea where this money that's flowing through all of this is coming from?
Well, I think a lot of it is, we hear George Soros a lot, but he and Open Societies certainly are funding this. You have Roy Singham. He has been talked about a lot. He's funding Code Pink and some of the far left groups that are part of this Indivisible coalition. But the point is they want to continue doing these because they've got to try and keep people engaged. They've got to try and keep the hate for President Trump up. And so they're trying to do, just one protest after another. And it's interesting to watch these trainings because that's what they talk about, is how do we keep the energy up in order to try and defeat him and Republicans in November.
All right. The article is entitled Indivisible No Kings Training Call. Anti-Trump group not doing violence at this time, but maybe later, they say. The author is Kyle Olson. And you can read all about it if you go to townhall.com. Look for Kyle Olson's reporting. And Kyle, you can find him on the X platform at Kyle Olson 4. Kyle, thanks for joining us on the Scott Jennings Show. We'll follow your reporting and have you back in the weeks ahead. We got to take a break. We'll come back with more breaking news from Washington after this. It's Scott on Salem. Stay with us.
The voice of free speech. The truth delivered. Common sense for the American
Okay, it's
people.
Friday, March the 27th. Common sense for the American people. Scott Jennings broadcasting here from Louisville, Kentucky today on Salem, coast to coast. By the way, you can always, if you like the radio show, you might love the video piece of it, snc.tv. And I'm told, by the way, that we're now on Roku. If you have a Roku television, you can get the SNC Salem News Channel video app on Roku now. I think that puts us in like 80 million households or something. So hopefully you'll have a chance to check that out. However you get the show, whether you listen on radio or whether you pick up the podcast, the Scott Jennings Show on Apple or Spotify, or whether you check out the video products, courtesy snc.tv, we're grateful. Because we are really working hard to bring you the latest breaking news and best analysis in all of American media. And we are continuing that tradition and trend today. Let me just catch you up on where we are in Washington, D.C. In the middle of the night, the United States Senate met, and on a voice vote passed a funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security. Roughly, here's what they did. They voted to fund all of the Department of Homeland Security, including TSA, which has been the big dominant story at our airports. That happened. What they did not do is fund ICE, and they did not fund Customs and Border Patrol. So they took out the immigration enforcement piece, and they funded everything else, which is TSA, the Coast Guard, FEMA, et cetera, et cetera. So that happened on a voice vote in the middle of the night. They did not take a recorded vote, interestingly, but they did do a voice vote. They passed it, and then the Senate immediately adjourned. They went into a 2-week recess. It's planned. It's called the Easter recess. This is what's called jamming the House, because what they did here is pass something that now has to go back to the House, and that has to get approved. Here's the problem. Everything I am seeing, everything I am reading right now tells me that the House Republicans, who are in the majority, a thin majority, but in the majority, they are not interested in ratifying what the Senate did last night. So, the situation is the Department of Homeland Security remains unfunded today, and we are awaiting what Speaker Johnson is going to say. He has been on a conference call with the House Republicans for the last 2 hours or so, and they have been sorting it out amongst themselves. It's my understanding, by the way, we're expecting and hoping to hear from the Speaker during this hour of the Scott Jennings Show, and as soon as he can call us, he's going to, and we'll put him right on the air. We will put him right on the air, but we're waiting to hear from the Speaker. In fact, what I'm being told right now by his office, this is coming into the show as we speak, is they've wrapped up this conference call. He is going to take a couple of questions from the media that is assembled in the hallway, and then he's going to give us a call. So as soon as he calls in, we're going to put the Speaker on the air. Here's what I'm hearing. House Republicans will not ratify what the Senate did, and there is a plan being kicked around where they want to pass a 60-day clean continuing resolution, keep it going as is, that would fund everything, including ICE and including Customs and Border Patrol. Here's the problem with that. Over in the Senate, the Democrats, through Chuck Schumer, their leader, have said that is dead on arrival. So if the House were today or over the weekend to do their plan, the 60-day plan, it's not going to pass the Senate, which likely means that the majority leader, John Thune, would not call the Senate back into session to just sit around and vote down something that has no chance of passing. So where would that leave the Department of Homeland Security? Yeah, well, it would leave it unfunded, to be honest. Where does that leave the TSA? Well, it leaves the TSA in limbo. For their part, last night, President Trump said he is declaring a national emergency, and he is directing the Secretary of Homeland Security, which is now Markwayne Mullin, previously in the Senate. He is directing Mullin to pay TSA agents through the authority of a national emergency. Now, I think they're supposed to get a paycheck today. It is not clear to me whether they've gone ahead and processed that. I don't know the answer to that. I haven't seen that reported. But as we sit here, I'm not entirely sure. However, if they do try to do this, I assume someone out there is going to legally challenge it and say it's not constitutional or it's not legal because there's been no money appropriated. So we'll have to see how that plays out. So what's hanging in the balance here? You have TSA agents who make an average of about $50,000 a year who are being asked to come to work and not get a paycheck. Today, they'll be missing paycheck number 3. In fact, I'm going to play this TSA agent who's talking about on the news having to get a second job. Let's listen to cut 14.
At what point did you realize you needed a second job?
Yeah, I actually got my second job after the first shutdown that happened last fall. Fortunately, I was able to make things happen with my scheduling, but even then, trying to manage full-time schooling, I'm doing flight training right now locally, and so, again, it's just a lot of juggling, a lot of rearranging those payments that are due in our day-to-day lives.
That TSA agent was talking to Wolf Blitzer on CNN. So what's happening is these TSA agents are having to take second jobs. They're calling out sick. Like over 500 have quit altogether because they have to go make ends meet some other way. This, of course, is leading to short staffing at airports, which is causing major lines, and we've been covering this for a couple of weeks now. The president sent ICE to the airports. That appears to be helping somewhat. But it's not as good, frankly, as just having a fully funded and fully staffed TSA on duty. We do have a little bit of sound coming in here from a member of the House. His name is Eric Burleson. He represents the 7th District of Missouri. He is a member of the House Freedom Caucus. So these are the conservatives in the House, the Freedom Caucus. Burleson made these comments just a few... Actually, let's table that. We now have a live interview with Congressman Russell Fry of South Carolina. Russell, thanks for calling in. I know you've just been on the phone with the Speaker and the rest of the House conference. Russell, I'm just going to hit you cold. What's the mood in the House about what the Senate did last night?
I think pretty poor. I mean, like in the middle of the night, these guys, like 5 of them were on the floor and passed this thing under unanimous consent. I mean, you take the president's biggest agenda item that he ran on, that he won on, which is securing the border and making sure that we're taking care of our Border Patrol, our ICE agents, and we abdicate that and we kick the can down the road. Sure, yeah, there's, funding for all the other purposes here, but at the end result, it completely deviated from where the House's position has been all along, which is this bill originally, and I want to reverse this for your listeners. This bill was pre-negotiated with House and Senate, Republican and Democrat leadership. It was ready for prime time. And then the Democrats reversed course, after what happened in Minnesota, and started like demonizing ICE, continuing this demonization. And, so they keep moving the goalposts. And so to see what the Senate did, I think the American people want some intestinal fortitude, right? They want their senators to lead. They want them to, they're tired of this. I hear from people back home all the time, and they're like, stand strong, stay with the president, make sure you're advocating for ICE. It is a very bad precedent to come into, say, Homeland Security's budget and take a couple line items that you don't like on ICE or anything else and just zero them out. And that's kind of what the Senate has done. So it's a little frustrating right now that, we're at odds with our Senate counterparts. But the message from us, is, at least for me and the people that I represent, is clear, is I'm not going to take what the Senate did. They can get on a plane and go home. We will stay here and do the responsible thing to get our government back open, but that includes making sure that we're taking care of ICE and Border Patrol.
All right, that voice you're hearing, Congressman Russell Fry, friend of the show, representing South Carolina. Russell, would you mind hanging on with us? We've got to take a commercial break, a mandatory commercial break. I want to hear more about the conversation that's going on, and also understand we're also waiting for the Speaker to call, and so we may hear from him as well. You're listening to the Scott Jennings Show. We're in something of breaking news coverage right now because of what's going on Capitol Hill. We're going to track it through the commercial break. Russell Fry is on the line, and maybe the Speaker soon. Stay with us here on Salem. Don't miss a thing. More after this.
You've heard the narratives. Now get the truth. It's the Scott Jennings Show.
It's Friday, March 27th. We are in breaking news coverage. But it is Friday, and it is Friday afternoon, and it is 22 minutes past the hour. And you know what that means, Hollywood Sean.
And now, the Relief Factor. Pain of the week. Oh.
The pain of the week, brought to you by Relief Factor, 1-800-4RELIEF, relieffactor.com. If you have aches and pains, I might advise you to try Relief Factor. They have a thing called the 3-week quick start. It's $19.95. You get 3 weeks supply. Might work for you. Relief Factor pain of the week this week is the pain being felt by American travelers all across the country who are going to airports and facing long lines because of the back and forth between Republicans and Democrats over funding DHS and therefore the Transportation Safety Administration. On the line with me right now as part of our breaking news coverage and now incorporated into our pain of the week coverage is Russell Fry, our friend and congressman from South Carolina. Russell, they say there's two parties in Washington, the House and the Senate. And I think we're experiencing that today. The Senate overnight passed on a voice vote a bill to fund DHS, but not ICE and not Customs and Border Patrol. You've been on the phone with your House Republican colleagues for the last little bit, and it sounds like that's not going to fly in the House. I'm interested in what was going on this call. You guys get on the phone. I assume people are just livid about being jammed by the Senate on this, and in a way, they're trying to force you to vote for something here that's really not in accordance with what the Republican Party wants, which is to continue to fund our border security, right?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. And so it's a little bit perplexing to me that we're day 50 of a shutdown or whatever it is. It's like 40 some odd days that Republicans keep trying to say that they're doing this, but in the dead of the night, there's 5 people that do a unanimous consent request, bipartisan. Most people at that time are sleeping or should be. And this thing sails through. Senators skip town. They're out of here thinking that they've done their job. But in the meantime, we have kind of this. If you saw this week, the president said, we're going to do something. We're going to help ICE. We're going to fix it. We'll or not ICE, TSA. We're going to make sure that these guys are paid. So he was shifting around funding. We know that they're going to, the president's working on making sure that he's delivering for them to make sure that they can come to work and be part of it because they're really struggling too, right? And so the Senate, the pressure was off the Senate a little bit, like keep pushing it, but like the pressure was off because TSA and the airport lines were the biggest thing. And then in the middle of the night, they pass this thing, but they completely omit Homeland or Border Patrol and our ICE agents. And that, look, when you talk about human trafficking investigations, these are some of the things that were omitted from their product. And so they take this Democrat product. It's not conservative. Yes, it doesn't have any of the demands that the Democrats made on, removing masks from the ICE agents, things like that. But it doesn't actually do anything else. It doesn't fund them. It doesn't continue what the president has made as one of his key signature items. And it really was it was just flatly irresponsible to do this on a Friday. I'm happy to work all through the weekend to get the job done, but I just want to feel like that we're holding the line a little bit in the Senate, and it just doesn't appear like we did.
I mean, to me, the real issue here, and we cannot say this enough, is that Democrats have basically said their party's policy is no immigration enforcement at all. They don't want any funding for immigration enforcement. They don't want our laws enforced. They don't want people deported. Even these violent aliens like the Venezuelan in Chicago who killed this poor 18-year-old girl at the University of Loyola Chicago, they don't want to deport anybody, Russell. And they don't. It's nuts to me. We've got one of our 2 major political parties that their number one constituency is illegal aliens, including violent, criminal, illegal aliens, and they are willing to wreak havoc on our government and on our airports because of that. Russell Fry is congressman from South Carolina. I got about 10 seconds here. It's spring break season, brother. You represent Myrtle Beach. Are you worried about the airport there? I know I would be. I mean, it's got a lot of folks coming in and out.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'll tell you, I talk to those TSA agents routinely. They are complete warriors. They're really holding down the fort. They're showing up. Yeah. I mean, they're ready to be paid. But, I think all the airports around the country are really struggling right now. But we need to do the responsible thing in Congress and do it the right way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That's Russell Fry. Thanks for calling in, congressman from South Carolina. And we are going to get more on this breaking news after this commercial break. I am told the speaker is likely ready. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a break, and hopefully when we come back, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, will be here to lay out the full position of the House Republicans right after this. It's Scott Jennings on Salem. Don't miss this conversation. Stay with us.
That's the Relief Factor Pain of the Week.
And we're in breaking news coverage here on Friday, March 27th. It's common sense for the American people. Scott Jennings on Salem. And let me bring you up to speed on this news. In the middle of the night, the Senate, on a voice vote, passed a bill to fund some of the Department of Homeland Security, but not all of it. And what they did not fund was immigration enforcement, ICE, Customs and Border Patrol. They would not do it, and they passed this bill, and they left town, and the Senate has gone on recess. As you might imagine, this is not going over well among the House Republicans. And here to talk about the position of the House Republican Conference is the Speaker of the House. Mike Johnson of Louisiana joins us live. Mr. Speaker, thank you. You've been on the phone with your members, the Majority Republican Conference, over the last couple of hours. Tell us, what's the mood and what's going to happen next?
Scott, thanks. We're outraged. I mean, I just did a press conference here on the Hill, and I'm glad to come on the show immediately after that to give your listeners the down low. We are furious. I mean, I think that came through in the press conference just now. I don't know how else to say it. I began the comments today by saying, let me be absolutely crystal clear. Under no circumstances are House Republicans going to be a part of anything that defunds border security and immigration enforcement or reopens our border. Scott, that's exactly what the bill last night does. Literally in the bill itself, I read at the press conference, at page 2, under this section 4 that's called explanatory statement, it says literally, I read the bill, that all of U.S. immigration and customs enforcement, border security operations, and everything under the heading of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, quote, shall have no force or effect for purposes of this act, and amounts to, in the final bill, an appropriation of exactly $0. It says it in the bill. I can't believe that our conservative Senate friends in the Senate had a chance to at almost 2:30 in the morning.
We're talking.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Speaker. We were having a little trouble with your connection. This is House Speaker Mike Johnson. So you're reading to us from the bill the Senate passed. It's obviously dead on arrival in the House, and I can tell how angry you are on behalf of your members. So what do you plan to do? The House is still in session. Are you going to pass something over the weekend here and kick it back to the Senate?
Yes, we're going to pass, hopefully by tonight or at the latest by tomorrow morning, as soon as procedurally we can get this done. We're going to pass a clean, continuing resolution that will get us to mid-May, about 8 weeks or so. And that will allow all of those who sacrificially serve our country to keep the nation safe get their paychecks. Scott, TSA agents have not been paid for half of this fiscal year already. They've gone without regular paychecks. It's 42 days. They've been working without pay. This is the second longest shutdown in U.S. history, and everybody listening to the sounds of our voices needs to ask themselves, why? Why would Democrats do this? It is very simple. What they want to do is defund the two agencies of the federal government that keep the borders closed and secure and who go out and enforce immigration law. They don't want criminal illegal aliens who got into this country under Joe Biden deported from the country. And you see the terrible effects that has happened from this. In the last few days, we've had innocent Americans murdered by criminal illegal aliens who are released onto the streets by Democrats in sanctuary city, blue cities, and over that wide open border under Biden. We can't allow for this. The most basic function of government is protecting its citizens, and Democrats don't want to do that.
Mr. Speaker, as a procedural matter, are you bound to have to vote on what the Senate did overnight, or can you just throw that in the garbage and go straight to your 60-day clean CR plan?
Yeah, we're rejecting it. It goes straight to the shredder where it belongs, and we're going to send instead a continuing resolution that just goes for that number of weeks, 8 weeks. Now, we can continue negotiations with Democrats if they want to be in good faith, which they're not, over that period of time. But right now, and in that interim period, you got to make sure that people are paid. Now, look, I want to hasten to say, so grateful to President Trump. I've talked to him twice already this morning. He signed an executive order to get all those TSA agents in the airports paid right now. I mean, that's happening right now. The Office of Management and Budget is processing paychecks right now. He has heroically stood forward and shown leadership, as always, and we're doing our part to lead in the House. I have to defend the House. I have to defend the safety of the American people, and this is the only way that we have to do this against these shenanigans by the Senate Democrats.
That's a little news to me about the payments going out today, and I was wondering how long it would take to process this. So yesterday, the president signed an executive order declaring a national emergency and instructing Secretary Mullen at DHS to pay the TSA. So you're saying, your understanding is that processing is occurring as we speak?
It is. It is happening now, and that's going to help alleviate the pressure at the airports and get the lines down again, because we'll get the people who are in charge of all that paid as they should be. And it is so infuriating to us, Scott, that Democrats are willing to use the American people as pawns. They don't care. They just don't care. They're in their quest to open the borders wide and to keep all these dangerous illegals in the country. They will harm American citizens to do it. I mean, they've just demonstrated it over and over. Yesterday, we had a vote to fund Department of Homeland Security, the entire department, again, for the third time. We only got 4 House Democrats to vote with the Republicans on that. They just don't care. They're playing a political game, and it's dangerous.
Mr. Speaker, you said you've spoken with the president a couple of times. What was his reaction to hearing the news about the Senate voice vote? Is he as angry as you and your members are, or how is he processing the news today?
He and I share the same emotion as all Republicans here do. When we were met with the news that they would not fund, we would provide $0 of funding for border security. I mean, it's insane. And he said, we can't do this. I said, you're absolutely right, Mr. President. We're going to have to stick together on this. We'll send the CR over to the Senate, and what can happen if sanity prevails is that they will just see that unanimous consent. That's the procedure in the Senate, and just accept the continuing resolution. We didn't put any partisan priorities or politics in there, no dirty tricks, nothing. It's just a clean continuing resolution for a matter of about 8 weeks, so we can make sure that while the politicians in Washington are debating over all these policies, real people aren't getting hurt in the process. Real simple stuff. This is, we talked about, Scott, when we were together a couple weeks ago. The upcoming election is a contrast for America. It's a contrast between common sense and crazy. And the Democrats on Capitol Hill give us new illustrations every single day about how crazy they really are.
Well, in a continuation of that posture and attitude, I will read to you, in case it hasn't been brought to your attention yet, the statement from Chuck Schumer. He says a 60-day CR that locks in the status quo is dead on arrival in the Senate. And so while you all are going to fund the Department of Homeland Security this weekend, Chuck Schumer says no. So not an unexpected posture from him, I don't think. My question really is, what are you hearing from your Republican leadership counterparts in the Senate? Senator Thune, Senator Barrasso, are you all in communication yet or not yet?
We haven't. I mean, this all happened in the wee hours of the morning, and I didn't get a lot of sleep last night, but Leader Thune and I exchanged one text message. In the midst of it, they kind of made this decision, under duress and late in the middle of the night, and there wasn't a lot of coordination between the parties. Look, I'm not placing blame in the lap of Leader Thune because he has a very difficult job over there. This blame solely lies with the Democrats in Congress who are playing games. The problem in the Senate is we only have 53 Republicans there, and as you know, under the rules, they need 60 votes to move most everything. The Democrats decided they would just take the American people hostage, and that's what's happened here. But we cannot go along with it. We cannot negotiate with legislative terrorists. I mean, that's what it is. And under these circumstances, if we were to eat this terrible mess that they sent over to us today, it would be the equivalent of them shooting the hostage and keeping the ransom. And they would set a terrible precedent, and they would not fund border security and immigration enforcement. We just can't be a part of that.
That's the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. He's been on the phone with members of the House Republican Conference this morning. He just spoke to the press in the Capitol, and the response from Republicans is, we're not going to accept what the Senate did overnight. And so, Mr. Speaker, you all are going to go back into session tonight, and possibly tonight, maybe tomorrow, send back a 60-day clean CR that fully funds the Department of Homeland Security. Do you expect to get full votes from the House Republicans? Will you get every single vote in the conference on that? And will you might attract a couple of Democrats to that?
I believe the Republicans will all stick together. We had a long talk about that this morning, and, we don't have great options. The best and most obvious thing to do would be to fund 12 separate appropriations bills, get this last one over the line, and do it the right way. But Democrats are preventing that. So this is our next best option. I think Republicans will stick together. And I really hope, Scott, that there's a couple of Democrats left in the House and the Senate who will come to their senses and understand this must be done. I mean, I really hope they'll help us get this done.
Mr. Speaker, are you planning to keep the House in session once you pass this 60-day plan, or will you also take the Easter recess here, or will you just keep them in Washington until the Senate comes back?
when we pass the CR today, we will lob that over to the Senate, and this job will be done on government funding. And so what the intention is to not hold everybody here restlessly while we sit around and wait on the Senate action. I have the ability to pull everybody back with 48 hours notice if something develops, but we will have done our job for the fourth time, I'll add. This is literally the fourth time the House will pass a Homeland Security funding bill and send it to the Senate. We're doing our work. It's the Senate that's playing games, and we'll see how it plays out. But I can assure you House Republicans are on the job. Many of them want to be in their districts right now doing work there because we've been held here so much. And, of course, it's an election year. They want to be out talking and visiting with their constituents and doing the events and all that. So, it'd be foolhardy, I think, for me to hold them here while we await next action. But I can bring them back on a moment's notice, and we will.
That's Speaker Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. He has just finished talking to the conference. He has just finished talking to the political reporters in the Capitol. And his first call was to us here on the Scott Jennings Show. Mr. Speaker, I know you got hundreds of people coming at you today. We are grateful for your time, and we wish you luck tonight and tomorrow as you get the Republicans together to fund border security in the United States of America.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate you and your important voice out there. God bless you. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, Mr. Speaker, thanks for joining us here on the Scott Jennings Show. That was the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. And this is the breaking news. The Senate overnight passed a funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security. It did not include any funding at all for border security at all. That means no ICE, no Customs and Border Protection. Mike Johnson just read from the bill what they sent over, $0 for that. That's not going to fly in the House. They've got a 60-day plan. They're going to do that tonight or possibly tomorrow. But either way, the Senate plan in the House, the breaking news is dead on arrival according to the Speaker. They're going to send something back to the Senate, and it's probably not going to pass over there. So the impasse continues. We did also learn that apparently the paychecks for TSA agents, as the Speaker understands it, are being processed right now by the Office of Management and Budget. This is because of the President's national emergency declaration last night. So a lot of moving parts today on this breaking news coverage on the Scott Jennings Show. I got to get a quick word in for our friends at the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. It is supportifcj.org, supportifcj.org. In short, the fellowship is providing emergency services and emergency first aid, food, emergency essentials for the people in the Holy Land who are living in these bomb shelters due to Operation Epic Fury. Please pray for the protection of Israel. Pray for the troops who are over there fighting these terrorists in Iran. Do it by going to supportifcj.org, supportifcj.org. I'm going to do it myself today, and we hope you stand in prayerful support of the people in Israel. When we come back, Batya Unger Sargon is here to react to that. Don't miss this conversation here on Scott Jennings Show. Stay with us. And it's Friday, March 27th, home stretch here on the show, and we're in breaking news coverage. You just, if you've been listening, heard from the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who is none too pleased about what the Senate did overnight on this DHS funding flap, the impasse that we've all been suffering from for the last several weeks. Joining me live for Friday Punditry, my friend and host of the show, Batya, on News Nation, is Batya Unger Sargon. Batya, you've been listening to all this here. You've been patiently waiting and listening to the Speaker. You've been watching the news. What is your reaction to what's going on in Washington, and how are you analyzing this as a voice of the people out there?
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure to be here and to get to hear this breaking news right out of Speaker Johnson's mouth. I want to start by asking you a question because I really don't understand this, and I think if I don't understand it, I'm following this very closely, maybe some of your other listeners don't. I thought that the big, beautiful bill already funded ICE. So I'm confused as to why there is even a fight over the funding of ICE, because I thought that the president had sort of very brilliantly, with the help of Speaker Johnson, taken that as a something that the Democrats could even hold hostage off the table. Do you understand that, Scott?
So they did fund ICE. They gave it a lot of extra money to do a lot of extra things. And so basically they're able to pull, as I understand it, from those future-looking appropriations, for current operations, but that's different than the regular appropriations process expenditure that would be authorized for ongoing operations. And and I'll admit I'm not sure I fully understand it either. But the Speaker was reading to us from the bill that the Senate passed, and they're saying $0 will go to any immigration enforcement. And so I think what the House's position is that the Senate is trying to zero out any money at all for immigration enforcement, and they're just not going to take any part of that. So I don't think the ICE agents, because of the way they're able to move money around, are in danger of missing their paychecks right now. But I think there's a concern about what the Senate did that is going to try to zero it out from this point forward, which of course is dead on arrival in the House. So I know it's a little, it's confusing to me, to be honest. But there's a difference between ICE and TSA right now, and that I think they've been able to move money to ICE to keep them paid. That's not been true for TSA, and that's why the TSA guys have gone without a paycheck.
Right. And thank God the president is now going to pay them. I cannot stand when people who are doing God's work for not a lot of money, let's be honest, these people make $50,000 a year, and they can't even get access to that. And when you think about how that disincentivizes people from doing one of the most important jobs, it's truly infuriating. So I'm very glad to hear that they're getting paid. This is going to keep happening. And I don't know about you, Scott, when I see these lines around the going all the way outside at airports, like, to me, this is third world country stuff. I cannot stand
let me ask
to
you,
see this in the
Yeah, let me ask you a question about that. Who do you think the public is blaming? Do you think they understand that it's Democrats who have plunged us into chaos, or are they confused about it? What's your read on it?
I think they blame the political class. I don't think that they're sitting there saying Republicans or Democrats. They cannot stand the bickering from our elected officials. And I honestly think the average American is not sitting there being like, it's the Republicans, it's the Democrats. They cannot stand this dysfunction. And what I was going to say is, to me, the most important thing coming out of this is I just had Representative Suhas Subramanian, who's a Democrat, on my show, and he was saying he would partner with the Republicans to sign some kind of legislation that no matter what happens, TSA agents get paid, that you cannot have this situation in the future where their paychecks get held hostage by the bickering that, let's face it, Scott, is not going anywhere. So I think we have to find a way to insulate the American people from the unfortunate politicization and partisanship in our politics, because honestly, it's a great question you asked, who are Americans blaming? And to me, it seems like, from what I'm hearing, they're blaming politicians. They don't really care which side.
Yeah, I think that's right, although I have to say the extreme position of the Democrats on this idea that we cannot enforce any immigration laws at all, that we shouldn't, have any border security, we shouldn't have any deportations. I mean, staking out that position, I know for their base, that's good, but I'm not sure that's where the American people are. I guess the question is, can Republicans make it stick? Batya, your show airs on Saturday night at what time?
7 p.m. Eastern.
7 Eastern. It's a great show. It's hosted by Batya. She's one of the greatest TV hosts, one of the greatest pundits, one of the greatest analysts in our politics. 7 o'clock, News Nation, Saturday night. Watch Batya. We're done. We'll be back Monday and see where all this mess is by then. I'm Scott Jennings. This is Salem. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Common sense for the American people. This is the Scott Jennings Show.